Hello and welcome, I'm the Rambling Director, and today we're going to be talking about The Virtuoso. This is a 2021 film by Nick Stagliano. It stars Anson Mount and Abbie Cornish, as well as the incomparable Anthony Hopkins, who's just one of my favorite actors ever. This film follows a hitman called the Virtuoso, who is on a mission to find and assassinate a person called White Rivers. Along the way on this mission, he has to take out somebody else by shooting the wheel of their car. When the car tire blows out, he crashes into another building, which is going to kill him. All of that goes according to plan, but he accidentally kills a civilian along the way, and it really just eats him alive. So he talks to the mentor, a character played just fantastically by Anthony Hopkins. The mentor is the one who gives him his assignments. He's sort of like the mob boss, and throughout the story, we see him give some pointers to the Virtuoso, trying to steer him in the right direction, trying to let him know that he needs to just let this go, collateral damage happens, but he can see it in his eyes. He knows that the Virtuoso has been irreparably damaged. His mental state has been irreparably damaged by seeing this civilian die. And so along the way on this mission, he is trying to deal with that trauma. His mentor is trying to help him to continue and to let it go, and he meets a cast of very intriguing characters who all also might have some interesting backstory that we will have to discover along the way, along with the Virtuoso. This is really one of the most original movies in terms of the way it is laid out and the way it is structured that I've seen in a long time. And I'll tell you what, the idea of a hitman who gets overly involved and starts to care too much about collateral damage and stuff like that, that's not the most original plot in the world. But what I like about it is that the storytelling is done so well because it's not afraid to go for a completely different structure. Most films follow a normal 3-act structure, and I guess you could kind of cram the events into a 3-act structure if you wanted to. However, it's quite unbalanced, and the way the story unfolds feels much more like the structure of a novel, and I like that a lot. It's the sort of weird, bizarre story structure that you don't see a whole lot in film, but it's welcome, because a lot of movies suffer from trying to stay in the framework of a 3-act structure, and I think that it can damage the movie. The Disney production of Into the Woods suffered from that. They tried to take the entire second act of the play and cram it into the third act of a movie, and that's just not enough time. I'll give you some of my criticisms. Ultimately, I think the way the guns are handled in this movie is excellent. They actually use a lot of realism in the way they're handled, and you can tell that a lot of these actors actually have had training either for the movie or just maybe they're just gun owners and they've just had training in firearms, because a lot of them had excellent trigger discipline, and I've noticed that going through the movie. The guns actually work the way they would in real life. People are going around with silencers, but it's still making a loud noise because suppressors don't actually mute a gun the way they do in a lot of action movies. So I appreciate the realism in that. I also, looking at the poster, looking at the thumbnail, I thought this was going to be much more of an action movie, but it's not. It's more of a psychological film, and I like that. The big fight is really a shootout, and really there's not a lot happening in that scene. It's more about the characters psychologically overcoming one another, and I like that aspect as well. One of the best parts of this movie is by far the narration. And I'm not really a fan of narration when it goes overboard, because a lot of filmmakers tend to get lazy and rely on the narration as a way to just spoon-feed the audience information. But what I like about this is that it uses that to show how much this character lives in his own head. He is very thoroughly a loner. He's not somebody who, not to be confused with the character, because there's a character called the Loner, but he's a loner, and he does not have a lot of social interaction, and so he lives in his own head. And I also like this sort of accusatory nature of this very calm, almost melodic narration, and yet he doesn't refer to himself as I. He says it, you do this, you do that, you think that. And using the second person actually allows it to be almost somewhat self-incriminating, sort of self-accusatory. It's subtle, but I love that. It's something that clearly they put some thought into the best way to tell the story. A part of that narration is that he goes into excellent depth on what he has to do to be safe living as a hitman. And so they go into depth in the first part of the movie, showing things that are not necessary for us to know, but they build out this world. They make this world seem so lived in and so natural by showing us the mechanics of it. He doesn't just go to the post office to pick up his mail, and he certainly doesn't have mail delivered to him. He has to have a P.O. box at a private company using a fake name. No real names. In fact, we never know his actual name. Even when it's written on a piece of paper and given to him, he says, "You read your name." But we don't know it. To us, he is just the virtuoso. Anthony Hopkins, we never know his name. His name is just the mentor. In fact, we only learn one character's name in the entire movie, and I was surprised to find out that it was an actual name. It's kind of cool. It's a kind of little bit of storytelling that you don't see a whole lot. Now, I do have some complaints with the movie. One is towards the end, but I'm gonna keep it spoiler free, but I'm just gonna tell you the basics of what this scene entails. Somebody leaves a piece of identification sticking out of a bag. And that piece of identification is open and showing the picture. Now, because of a twist that happens in regards to that, you could argue that the character left it out knowing that the virtuoso would find it and look at it. But I don't know. It just seems like almost kind of random. I don't know anybody who would actually take an ID like that and leave it in a position sticking out of the bag in a way that another person would find it. There are little logistical details like that, and to be fair, there's not a lot of them, but there are a few, and I did notice them. Some of those logistical concerns unfortunately do find their way into the hitman, the virtuoso, actually performing hits on people. I find it very difficult to believe that when he blows out the tire using his rifle and causes that, I can even buy that he knew that by shooting this tire, the car would skid in that direction, he'd overcorrect, and he would go into this building. And he's actually wrong about one element. So that adds additional credibility. He thinks he's going to crash into one building, he actually crashes into another. And so that does add credibility to it. However, I just find it very hard to believe that some of these things that he does when he's going out and performing hits, I find it very difficult to believe that the police would not investigate further. Because, like, for instance, with the car, you know that they wouldn't just say, "Oh, the tire blew out and he flew into the car." They would say, "We need to look and see what caused the tire to blow out." And they would find the bullet hole. They would find the round in the road. They would look for these things. They would find them. There's also, for instance, like a moment where he breaks into another character's house, and along this road, it's a very suspenseful scene. It's a great scene. But I question some things, like the fact that the person, when we find out who this person is, there's no way that the only weapon they had on them was a shotgun with only 2 rounds in it. I think it's 2 rounds. Maybe 3, but I think it was 2 rounds because I actually had to keep rewinding it back a couple times because I thought, does he have like a double barrel break action shotgun? Is that the only thing he keeps with him? But no, he pumps it. He pumps it at least twice. And that means that he was using a pump action shotgun that only had 3 rounds in it. And unless this is California, and this guy really cares about the legal system in California, about the capacity of that, shotgun, I just am not buying the fact that he only had 2 rounds in that gun. I love the story with the collateral damage and how it affects him. I also love the storytelling that they're not only flashing back once in a while to show the woman on fire that has been just eating him alive, but also there are times when people are telling stories, are thinking back to events, and we hear the sound effects of the scene even when we don't see it. So, like, for instance, we hear the sound of the tire screeching and the explosion and the woman screaming, sometimes in the background, just as he's thinking about it. We don't need a flashback. We don't need to see that. We need to do exactly what the filmmakers did. Focus on his expression, because we know what happened. We saw it. What matters is how it's affecting him. And I love getting to see that. I love when a filmmaker has the confidence to just know the audience is smart enough to get it. There is another scene, and it is worth the $7 I paid to rent this movie. It is well worth it just to see Anthony Hopkins tell the war story. So when he sees the Virtuoso's really torn up about this, he decides to tell him a story about the Virtuoso's father and himself when they served in the war together. I think they served in Vietnam together. And he tells the story of how they were forced to shoot civilians. And in the background, as he is talking, you hear the sounds of the choppers. And you hear the screams very, very faintly, but you can hear it. And it's just magnificently done. And when all the sound fades away and it's just silence, and he's telling the story, and he tells it in this just brutally realistic way. I don't know if Anthony Hopkins ever served in war or not. Maybe it's just, I mean, he's such a brilliant actor. It's possible he is just acting with no experience, but good golly, that little scene could have fit into something like Saving Private Ryan and belonged there right at home. He just delivers it so beautifully. And there's something about, if you had a grandfather who served in World War II or who served in any war, you know what I'm talking about. When they trail off and they just go, yep. Did this thing, yep. Yep. They just have little verbal whiskers, like word whiskers, that find their way in. I don't know if it was written, but I was on the verge of tears watching him. It was so real and so good. Anthony Hopkins just always bringing that Oscar gold no matter what he's in. So excellent job to him. And excellent job to the whole cast. I also really liked Abbie Cornish. She is just a fantastic character, wonderfully set up. Her dialogue with the Virtuoso and how they connect and how they relate to each other is just fantastic, and the things they do with her character, the writing, it's a twist every couple minutes. It's just fantastic what they do with these characters. But in particularly, I love Abbie Cornish in this role. She's so charming. She's such a good actress. I recognize her. I know I've seen her in other things, but I couldn't quite place her. Even Anthony Hopkins, they don't glamour him up and make him look pretty. He looks like an old man. The Virtuoso himself is played just wonderfully. And you might say, when you see this, well, his character doesn't have a lot of personality. Yes, that's exactly the point. His character doesn't have a lot of personality. It's because he's not allowed to have a lot of personality or a lot of personal thoughts. I also love that they work into little elements. For instance, he has this dog that he sort of adopts. And at first you think, well, maybe he likes the dog. And then he takes a picture of it and he uses it as a wanted missing dog photo, and you realize, oh, he's just using the dog. But then he comes back and you realize, no, actually he does care for this dog. For him, that dog represents a normal life that he can never have. The film is really clever about working in little things like that and providing you with so much character detail and letting the story unfold the characters naturally. And everybody just seems so real. Again, this feels more like a book than like a movie. And so everything moves a little slower. It takes its time a little bit more. But personally, I love movies that take their time and just let you go on a journey with characters rather than pushing you along or making you feel like that there's, a million things going on and we have to just focus on all of those things. I love when a movie takes the time to just say, we're just going to sit back and watch these events unfold, because the events are interesting enough. We don't have to overcomplicate everything. And the events in this movie are interesting. The twists even feel more like the sort of twists you'd find in a detective story rather than something cinematic. It feels very real. And I just loved it. I loved it start to finish. I would give the Virtuoso a B+. Does it have problems? Sure, absolutely. But if you're in the right mindset and you're not judging it by the thumbnail and expecting it to be like super action-packed, gangland sort of thing, which is sort of what I got the impression of looking at it, If you're coming into it expecting something that's a little slower paced, that's going to let you have a good time, it's $10 to buy and $7 to rent. I kind of wish I just bought it now because I will watch it again. But that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.